John Davies. I'm Vice President of GreenBiz. I lead our research as well as our GreenBiz Executive Network. I'm really excited today to have a tremendous panel. So gentlemen, why don't you come out and join me? So we heard a lot this morning about some of the opportunities. We heard from the mayor and from Rocky Mountain Institute about some of the opportunities, some of the challenges with building a clean energy infrastructure. And so I've got a set of panelists here who are going to talk about what are some of the challenges, what are some of the interesting aspects of doing that to meet that goal of 100% renewables by 2045. But before we start, I want to have each of my panelists introduce themselves. Seth, let's start with you.
So I'm Seth Baruch. I'm National Director for Energy and Utilities for Kaiser Permanente, and I am responsible for managing our on-site renewable implementation program, which consists of a large deployment of solar projects at 100 different locations across California and Hawaii and Colorado.
Mark?
Mark Glick. I'm the Hawaii State Energy Administrator, run the state's energy agency. We're under the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism. And by law, the director of that agency is the Energy Resources Coordinator. Our agency has been delegated with planning, programs, and policy development and to advise the governor, the legislature, other county, state governments, and as well as to work with the private sector and the federal government on trying to coordinate our energy agenda.
Great. John?
Well, first let me say aloha. So I'm assigned here in Pearl Harbor. I'm the Facilities and Environmental Director for PAC Fleet. I also serve as the commander of the Naval Facilities Engineering Command in the Pacific. And in that capacity, I sort of oversee and direct all the construction, the facilities maintenance, the environmental and energy, utilities and infrastructure oversight for all the military installations in the Pacific area of responsibility.
Great. So, John, yesterday we saw the signing of the MOU between the governor and the undersecretary. So, in practical terms, what does that mean for the Navy and for the state of Hawaii?
So what I think is it just really strengthens the partnerships that we currently have with the utilities providers here in the state. We have a similar memorandum of understanding in the state of California. And I think one of the things is that the renewable energy is a priority for the Navy. I know the governor here has a pretty aggressive goal of 100% by 2045. The Navy's is a little bit not as aggressive. We're at 50, our goal is 50% of renewable by 2020 for all military installations. So I think this allows us to align our priorities and sort of learn from one another and get an appreciation for what the state is doing and how we can leverage that and sort of share lessons learned to achieve our goals in a more methodical approach. It really addresses 3 working groups, so it sort of gives us some left and right lateral limits on things that we should be looking at. And so I think there's a lot of goodness in that. We've been very successful in the state of California. I think Hawaii has a lot of opportunities despite its location to take the same approach, so it's a very good thing.
So is that 50% just state of Hawaii, or is that
No,
worldwide?
it's across for every naval installation. By 2020, 50% of all the power that the Navy consumes ashore will be from renewable energy.
So Mark, from your perspective, what does this mean for the state?
Well, you know, and this is about infrastructure development. For us, those 3 planks that Admiral Korka talked about, it will help target projects, programs, and I think as Secretary McGinn had mentioned yesterday, that this is really a long-term effort. We should look at the long-term view. What do we need to build to achieve 100% renewable in the electricity sector, but also to integrate all the pieces in what we now see as an emerging combined ecosystem. Electric vehicles and alternative fuel vehicles will be a big part of this. You've heard it's 2/3 of our energy mix in Hawaii, and so a lot of infrastructure needs to be developed, and I think we can leverage the resources of the bases here, and certainly, maybe create some new pathways and corridors on that side of business. And then the other piece is, of course, making sure that we have a resilient and safe and reliable system, and looking at cybersecurity, because with advanced metering infrastructure that you heard Colton Ching and others talk about today, we're kind of opening the door for having other people be able to peek in the system unless we make it very strong and resilient.
And Seth, from a corporate perspective, I know there are targets that Kaiser Permanente has. So what are some of those targets in terms of energy and renewables?
Well, really our most important target that we publicly announced just a few weeks ago is that we're aiming to be carbon neutral by 2020 and carbon positive by 2025, which means that we will take more carbon out of the atmosphere than we put in. Kaiser Permanente, as you may know, is one of the largest nonprofit healthcare organizations in the country. We have over 1,000 buildings, almost 40 hospitals, 11 million members, and so we have quite a large carbon footprint. And to get to carbon neutrality by 2020 is going to be a tall order, and that's one of the parts of my job. The first step in that process, really, as I mentioned, is this on-site renewable program. We're looking at about 80 megawatts of solar, on-site solar in our parking lots, in our data centers, on rooftops, all across the enterprise, primarily in California. About 80% of our business is in the state of California. And then once we sort of tap that out, we'll be looking at other opportunities. We do have, we're an off-taker for 2 off-site renewable energy projects, about 153 megawatts in California, 1 solar, 1 wind, that's put into the grid on our behalf. But that really, the most important target really is that carbon neutrality goal. Once the solar projects are done, we'll have half of our electricity in the state of California supplied through renewable resources.
Wow, tremendous, great. So, John, this morning in an earlier panel, we heard a discussion, and I think the last question was, what's going to make all this happen? And 2 out of 3 of them said innovation, or 2 out of 3 said leadership, and 1 said innovation. So what does the Navy do in terms of innovation as you're trying to approach this very aggressive goal, I think, of 50%?
Yeah, so that's a pretty good question. I think first it does start with some policy. Okay, so I think that's something that we sort of have a tendency to follow in the military. And then there's a leadership commitment. And so recognizing the need, establishing goals, having policies, and then sort of developing your plan to get there. I don't think you can do it without some sort of innovation. If I were to look at the Navy 10 years ago and to think that we would be where we are today with clean energy, alternative energy, I would not have predicted where we are. So I think the leadership is there, the commitment's there, and to drive it to reach the goals, it's the innovation. So I think industry forums like this allows us to get smarter. I think the partnerships that we have with people like the local utility provider or the private sector allows us to get smarter. And that knowledge allows us then to put it into some sort of acquisition and to sort of execute the plan to start achieving those goals.
So, Mark, I've always heard from other utilities that they always want to be number 2. So what sort of innovation? No one wants to be way out front there, but what sort of innovations are being driven here in Hawaii?
I think one of the things that we talk about a lot and we're most excited about, one of the things we're most excited about is on the advanced metering infrastructure and the overall combination of that in EVs through Jump Smart Hawaii. And that's a $55 million investment with the new Energy and Industrial Technology Development Organization, part of METI, Ministry of International Trade and Industry in Japan. And that investment has led to a really cool microgrid setup, but also the idea of being able to push the envelope in this next phase of how far can you use EVs, modeling the amount of resiliency you can add to the grid. The next phase also has a request for 300 volunteers to sort of be the analysts. They're the ones that will participate with the vehicles and be able to gather information from this virtual power plant, essentially. And so we're kind of excited, I think, as well as Hitachi and some of the key, Hawaii Natural Energy Institute and the other key partners. And, you know, part of it's leadership, but it's also the willingness of people to put real capital together to, you know, in this test bed to be able to test those solutions.
So Seth, Mark just brought up a really good point about resiliency, and when you're running a healthcare system, you know, uptime is a very important thing. So what sort of measures does Kaiser take to make sure that as you're incorporating all of these renewables, that you're still going to have the resiliency and the always-on power?
Well, I think we're going to be soon moving to the next evolution from the on-site renewables, and that's going to be combining that with the battery storage. We're looking to develop our first microgrid project. Actually, it'll be one of the first microgrids at a California hospital that's regulated by the state agency there called OSHPD. And we've been working very closely with OSHPD to put in a system that provides a backup for emergency and life systems if the backup to the backup goes down. So the grid goes down, you have these automatic transfer switches, which then turns on the backup diesel generators. There have been times when that doesn't happen. And so this is providing another layer of resiliency and backup for when it's rare, but that can happen. So that there's emergency backup systems are operating the lights, the alarms to evacuate the premises as necessary. And if this pilot project works, I suspect it's something that we'll be doing across our portfolio more broadly.
So John, in terms of resiliency, I mean, you know, 50%, you're putting a lot of bets on that. So, and I want you guys to always have power. So,
Yep.
so what is the Navy doing in order to ensure that? What sort of resiliency plans are in place?
Yeah, so when we talk about just energy as a whole, you know, resiliency, reliability, and security, I think are the key things, and you can't just look at one piece, right? And so we have to remember that renewable is just another source of getting power. So you sort of have to have a diversified portfolio. So our belief is, you know, there's the hardening of the system. There's taking into account the cyber threats that are out there, which are significant, and we can chat about that a little later. So I think the resiliency and reliability comes with maintaining our infrastructure, making sure we have distributed types of power source, taking advantage of existing systems, i.e. microgrids. And I think if you look at all those things put together, I think you will have a reliable system.
So Mark, John brought up the idea of security and cybersecurity. We had the hacker here earlier this morning talking about the threats and trying to scare everyone to come to his session later on today.
Did a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. So what's going on here in Hawaii? I mean, is that a big issue for you? Is that a lot of work going on behind the scenes?
That's an enormous issue. It's kind of a funny issue to talk about because many people can't really talk about it. So they're doing a lot of work that people don't know about because it has to be done in a, you know, sort of a secure manner. But there are things that are open and transparent, like the Fusion Center. And the Fusion Center is something that has been heavily supported by Hawaiian Electric, but also our Homeland Security and other key agencies, Adjutant General here in Hawaii. And the whole notion of that is how do you protect critical infrastructure? And it doesn't just deal with cybersecurity, but that has a lot to do with it as well. And so looking at new robust systems, partnerships with businesses and county governments across the board, and trying to make sure that simple, straightforward things are in place, safeguards are being taken. And the good news is that there's a lot of real interest in doing that, and it's identified as a priority. I suppose on the other side, it's an emerging phase. And so, you know, clearly I think a lot of people realize that we haven't gone as far as we need to go in that area. And as we ramp up advanced metering infrastructure, smart meters and so on, we're going to need to make sure that's a core piece. I know that the utilities believe that. I know the military is there working side by side. So I have a lot of confidence it will happen, but it's definitely something that's in their emerging phase.
So John, does this mean you'll even work with the Army to do this? Or?
So, I wish I would have listened to the session this morning on cyber, but I will tell you that I would imagine that's capturing a lot of attention. I'm sure, like many of you may have known, but back in January this year, someone hacked the power grid in Ukraine, and it was out for 6 hours. 6 hours, no power, no control, no ability to adjust settings. Think about, what if that would have happened to a hospital. The military has a lot of critical infrastructure here on Hawaii. This is the home to the Pacific Fleet Commander. And so it is something that we're not going to be able to do this alone. I don't think you'll stop cyber attacks from happening, but I think you need to be aware of them and be able to respond. And so that's where I think that it's a collective effort, as Mark mentioned earlier, with a lot of folks, industry, public utility companies, and sort of strengthen and building that reliable and secure system to be able to react and to take control over your system so that you're not compromised.
Great. So Seth, this morning we had our Accelerate program with a whole bunch of entrepreneurs pitching, and yesterday we had another set, and we have a lot online who couldn't really fly over to Hawaii, but they often talk to us and other groups within the room of, how do I get to talk to Kaiser? Mm-hmm. Are you open to people having a conversation with you about some of these early stage technologies or ideas that are going around?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you can imagine, I get a lot of calls from technology companies and other vendors, and you hear similar pitches. So sometimes it's a little challenging to differentiate and distinguish between, what they're really offering. But no, we're definitely open to that. I mean, we were, just as an example, one of the first adopters of the Bloom Energy fuel cells. That's back in 2009, 2010. So that was kind of bleeding edge for Kaiser at the time. So we're definitely interested in looking at new technologies. We've done some pilots with a range of different lighting, controls. Kaiser is it's a wonderfully complex organization. So a lot of decisions are made at the site level and at the regional level. And in some ways, I'm an advisor to them. So if I think a technology looks good, well, I don't really have any hospitals under my portfolio. I have to talk to, we're divided into 7 regions. We've got different medical service areas. And so it's partly I have to convince the people who actually run the sites to invest in these technologies. But I've passed along recommendations in the past and would be happy to do so.
Great. And Mark, how do people work with you? I mean, is your office door open, ready for innovators, or a little bit trickier?
No, we are, and we work in various ways and various stages. So we had invested a few years ago $500,000 into the Energy Accelerator to support the innovation efforts, and we do get developers all the time. I think it's kind of interesting, Seth. It's tough to wean through it, but we do have a process. We used to have a leaders list where people would want to get on that to show that they have a development that is a priority of the state and so on. And we wanted to make sure we had criteria to show that there was site control, that there was a proven technology, and those sorts of things. But the biggest thing is to be open to listen and without creating favoritism for any particular vendor, to be able to make sure that they can come to the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative meetings or be linked with HCEI members, our stakeholder group, alliance group, and to make sure that they have the lists and the opportunities to be able to find the right match for whatever it is they're doing. So we're definitely open for that.
Great. So John, slightly different take on this. how you've been around a lot of different parts of the Navy around the world. How do best practices get shared within the Navy so that they can learn from each other?
Yeah, well, that's a hard one. So if anyone has the answer to that, please let me know. Because that's just a tough one. And same thing with innovation. It's for the military, we're a very rule-based organization. We have specific process and tactics that we follow for the right reason, very right reason. So to create an environment that promotes the innovation or the sharing of information is something that that we really are working on, and we need to continue to do so. But someone mentioned up here is if we have that environment that we maybe challenge the assumption or challenge the status quo, we promote that free-flowing discussion and are open to different ideas and looking at things from a different perspective, we will gain from that. And that is something that one of our CNOs focus that he has as lines of efforts is learning quickly, okay, and accelerating our ability to reach that theoretical limit of decision making. And part of that comes with innovation. And so I think that sharing of information. And so I think we are moving in a right direction and creating that environment to benefit from it. But again, it is definitely not easy, I will tell you that.
Great. So I'm going to go over to our sidebar and take some questions from the online and the in-person audience. Elaine or Lauren, what do you have?
We are getting a lot of interest in transportation infrastructure in particular. So specifically for the Rear Admiral, does the 2020 goal include liquid fuels for transportation? And for everyone, how do you think about options like EV charger build out, fuel cells, or biofuels?
Yeah, so actually in the memorandum of agreement, we talked about electric vehicles as part of one of the working groups that we're having. So I go back to one of my original comments that, where were we 10 years ago with renewable energy and where we are today, I think we've made some incredible progress. And I think we have that comfort level in renewable energy. I think the electric vehicles, that's not in our comfort zone yet, but we are trying. We actually, in some places, we're more successful than others, and in California in particular. And so we do have electrical vehicles. We're looking at the infrastructure in place to be able to have a fleet of them, and we're getting there. Not as far along in that as we are renewable, but I feel comfortable with the progress that we're making. You will see electrical, solar-powered vehicles here on our installations today, but far short of where we want to go.
I'm sure you're probably excited about autonomous vehicles for
That would be, yeah.
for logistics. Yeah. That would be great, right? So, Mark?
Well, we have supported heavily, particularly during the ARA days, Recovery Act. We had a pool of funds that we provided for subsidies, essentially rebates, for vehicle acquisition as well as home chargers. And then we helped contribute to the largest per capita array of electric charging stations, level 2 stations in the country. And we have a nice app. If you go and you look up, I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but it's a beautiful green app on the charging stations that can be found in Hawaii. And essentially, if you do it, you have to be in Hawaii, or else it won't pick up the signal. But you'll be able to identify all the fast chargers, level 2 chargers, and be able to confidently keep yourself going if you've got an EV.
Great. So, Lauren, do you have another question for us?
Yeah, this is a theme that also came up yesterday, but sort of ensuring equity in all of this, whether it's transportation or access to things like community renewables. How are you all thinking about that, especially for Mark?
Well, community renewables was one of the great legislative victories. Last year was such a banner year. Obviously, we had the 100% renewable portfolio standard pass, as well as a 30% mandate by 2020, which we're also very proud of. It keeps the investment going in the right direction. But we also had an important bill for community renewables. And essentially that deals with the equity issue of making sure that renters and others that normally wouldn't have access high-density buildings would be able to buy into renewable credits, be able to basically know that they were essentially getting credited for renewable energy for the electricity they were using. That requires new tariffs under the direction of the Public Utilities Commission, and there is an open docket, and I'm hopeful. The Commission has really had its hands full with a whole number of key issues, including the change of control docket that's open, but clearly I believe that we'll return to that in the coming months and make some progress on that important measure.
That's great. Well, it appears that we have run out of time. I still have a whole page of questions here, but let's everyone please thank my panel here.